Hello, welcome to another Digital Photo Mentor photo editing live. Sorry, I'm a minute late. I was scrambling to make this to let everybody know that as of today, this is our last Saturday doing this, and then we switch to Wednesdays. So as of next week, there will not be a live next Saturday. So make sure that you change this in your calendars so that you come on Wednesday starting on the 18th. So taking a week off, and Rob's gonna be doing some gardening, and I'm doing some spring cleaning around the house. So, welcome everyone. I'm Darlene from Digital Photo Mentor, and a little bit discombobulated, just getting ready for you today. And what we're going to be doing is editing subscriber submitted images in Lightroom today. So I may use some other tools such as Photoshop, but we'll be using predominantly Lightroom and Adobe to demonstrate photo editing today and showing you some different techniques and also how to approach editing your images, what to do, and how to even decide what to do. So without further ado, I'll be right back. I'm just going to set up my Lightroom and I'll be in the chat with you momentarily. And I wanted to let you know, check out my new, oops, where is it? Me. Check out our new lighting. We've got a fancy new light over here, which is beautiful and creating great lighting. And we got the fancy light in the background, which is really fun. And I could do stuff like make a rainbow while I'm editing. So it's really fun. And we're stepping up our game in terms of lighting on our lives this week. So that's exciting. If you've got something new that you got going on with you, I'd love to hear about that in the chat. I see some regulars. Sheila had a frost. Uh-oh. I've got a cool image from Stephanie that has some frost as well that I think I'll be working on today. Raymond, welcome. Is this the first time you've attended, Raymond? I don't recognize your name. We have a lot of regulars, but I would love to welcome you, and I hope you get a lot out of today. Sheila, what else is going on there? Frail typing skills. Uh-oh. Mother Nature is pissed off. Rainy also in Oregon. I've got your tulip image. I've got some of Merle's as well. Welcome, Merle. Michigan is sunny. Excellent. Trish down under. I've got yours as well. Awesome. Ray was with us before, Rob. Okay, great. Well, welcome back, Ray. Raymond goes by Ray. Okay, awesome, Ray. Okay, so I've got a few images, and if you submitted some, you may recognize your images here, right? So I actually want to start with this one, Stephanie, because it's really cool. Poor tulips, but they got some, looks like some hoarfrost, right? So this is a really cool image. So I want to start with this one, and we are going to be using predominantly Lightroom today, right? If I feel like we want to do a texture or anything, I am going to hop over to Photoshop today. But if you are watching and you are using Luminar Neo or a different version of Neo or On One or something else, a lot of what I'm going to be talking about today and doing applies in any software, which is why, I try and make it as broadly appealing as possible or broadly applying as possible, right? So most tools have, a curves tool. Most of them have all the similar types of things in the basic panels. So try and follow along regardless of whichever software you're using. But I'd love to hear from you in the chat. Because we're doing Lightroom today, I'd love to hear from you. How many people, just let me know, what is your main photo editor? Tell me that in the chat, right? If it's Lightroom Classic, that's what we're using now. If you've got the monthly version that you pay for, or is it Luminar, or is it something else, right? And Lynn from Australia, Michael, I've got your images as well, Michael. Thank you for submitting. Okay, so yes, very cool image of Stephanie's. I love this flower here. One thing I want to always take a look at, are the camera settings as well as the image settings. So the exposure looks pretty good to me. I'm looking at the histogram. I don't see anything going off the either edge of the graph, right? There's no clipping warnings if I press J on my keyboard. Let me just turn my little mouse cursor on. There we go. So now you can see where I'm pointing. And I'm looking at her exposure. The only thing that I might have changed here, Stephanie, is just to use a slightly higher ISO so that you get a little faster shutter speed, right? When you're getting in close like this and you're using a 70mm lens on a crop sensor camera, you're sort of at the borderline of sharp, acceptable shutter speed for this lens. And when you get in closer like this, sometimes you can get some movement. So doesn't look like you've got that. It's nice and sharp, but just to be safe, I would use a little bit faster shutter speed, right? I'm just going to look at what lens she's got here because I want to see, did you have any ability to go wider with this lens at 5.6? Is that the widest you could go on this one? Because I'd love to see the background thrown more out of focus, but we're going to work on that. Okay, so to get started in Lightroom, the first thing I always do is look at the camera profile. So that is in the basic panel. And one other thing I want to mention as well, I'm just going to pop back over here. So besides the fact that we have a new date coming up next week, we also have a Lightroom masterclass coming. I haven't set a date for this yet because I need to start recording the videos similar to what I did with the Luminar Neo course, but we're going to have recorded videos and live lessons where you're all going to be in Zoom and a similar format. Okay, so that is coming as well. And I will be talking about a lot of these things in detail in the course as well. So one thing I just wanted to make a quick side mention of here is using something called solo mode. Okay, so if you have all your panels opened on here, let me just turn it off and I'll show you what happens. So if I open the basic panel, okay, and then I open the tone curve panel, and then I open this one, and then I open this one, okay, I end up having to do a lot of sort of scrolling to find the tool that I want. Okay, so what I do instead, okay, and you can get to this by right clicking on the actual like panel here, okay, so like the title bar, and choosing solo mode. And what that does is it only opens one panel at a time, with the exception of the histogram. Okay, so the histogram will stay open. Okay, but if I open the detail panel and then I say, okay, no, I want to go back to tone curve, it closes detail. Okay, so it closes the one that I'm on and opens just that one. And especially if you're working on a small computer or a laptop, it just gives you, it's just easier to work with, so you're not scrolling through all the tools trying to find things, right? There are also keyboard shortcuts for all of these things, like from going from basic to, I can notice I'm not using my mouse and I'm opening all the panels. These are keyboard shortcuts, right? So on a Mac, it's Command Control 1, 2, 3, and so on for each of the different panels. If you want to share, please, a link to our Lightroom keyboard shortcuts sheet, please, Rob, who is in the chat. You can download our free Lightroom keyboard shortcuts, and things like that are on there. Okay, so camera profile. If you just pull down the list from here, all you see are Adobe ones, right? But if you want to see more, use this little 4 squares. I call them postage stamps. I don't know what it's actually called. And this will open up and you'll see different ones here, okay, including artistic, black and white, and if you've shot raw, camera matching. Okay, so this is a raw Canon file. And I'm going to choose landscape in this case, probably. I'm going to look at the other ones. Okay, so there's standard, and you can see as I move my mouse over it, okay, portrait gives it a lot more green, but the tulips are picking up more purple as well, right? I think I'm actually going to go with portrait because landscape brings out too much green. Okay, so I'm going to go with portrait, right? And as you can see, just hovering over, it shows me a preview. So I'm going to choose portrait and then start from here, okay? The next thing, I'm going to do my shift double click trick. So that's holding the shift key, double click white. Now in this case, I'm going to undo that. and then double click blacks. So what that does is it sets the graph or the endpoints of the information on the graph so that it's just touching the edge, okay? In this case, I'm actually going to bring the whites up. So if I hold down the Alt key, you'll see that there's parts of it that are clipping as I go up, okay? So I don't really want to clip or lose detail. So clipping means no detail, right? And that means it's off the graph. But I'm going to do the same with highlights to recover that, okay? So I'm holding the Alt key down while I press the slider, and it shows me clippings. So I'm going to the left just until they go away. Okay, so just with a slight shift of camera profile and adjusting the whites and the blacks, we've just adjusted the brightness and the contrast a little bit so far. Okay, I'm going to warm it up a little bit. Now, we could go a couple of different ways with this one. Okay, so I could try auto white balance and see what that does. Excuse me. So that definitely warmed it up. And when you saw it raw, you also have all of the presets. So I could try all of these here that come in the camera. So daylight, cloudy, and so on. But I think auto actually did a pretty good job in this case. It warmed it up a little bit. I'm going to go a little bit more and then just take a little bit of the magenta out, right? So if we go more magenta, see it brings the purple out in the flower. If we go more green, now we get more leaves. So I kind of want to find a balance of keeping the purple in the tulip somewhere in there. Okay, so just a slight color shift. I'll see the difference that makes, right? If I turn this is the before, I'm just using the backslash key. So look at the before, it feels colder. This feels warmer, okay? So you could go either way with this image. That's what I'm saying. You could actually go colder as well because of the frost. So we could make it actually feel a little bit colder like that. Right. But I kind of like the warm feeling, like the sun has come out, and as Stephanie said, the frost melted off a few minutes later. Okay. I want to do a little crop on this one, so I'm using the keyboard shortcut R, and I'm going to go freeform. So aspect ratio is unlocked. Okay. Aspect is width by height. Okay. If you want to keep it locked and keep the same as the camera, you can just lock this little icon here, or hold your shift key down while you're dragging the corner, okay? But I actually want to just come in a bit on this side. So there's a lot of sort of busyness and bright stuff over here, but I'm also torn because there's a repetition of stuff over here, okay? So my first inclination was to crop like this, okay? Then I sort of lose that other flower over there, okay? So I'm just gonna play around with cropping a little bit. I like this one kind of going out of the frame. And I'm not sure I want to crop off the top of this, but let me just play around with this a little bit here. Okay. Actually, I don't mind that. And even take this one down a little bit. Okay. Ideally, I actually want even more space over here. Okay. Well, let's see how that looks. I'm also going to flip it. Okay. So the leading lines here are these stems of the flowers, and these ones are kind of coming in from the bottom, but they're out of focus. So I want to see what this looks like flipped. And you can do that by going up to photo, flip, horizontal. Okay, now your eye enters the image always from the left hand side because our society we read from left to right. Now I feel like the flowers are coming into the picture. Okay, we'll deal with this bright area in a different way. But I kind of like this arching over, right? It's sort of centered, right? If I go more this way, right, we could go a couple of different ways with the cropping here. Let's try that. That one's not bad either. And we still got a little bit of the mirroring, but I feel this leaf feels more cropped off. So I go a lot by feeling as to what feels right, right? So even though it's more centered here, to me, it feels more right. It feels more balanced. Okay, I've got this mirroring element in the background balancing this one here. Okay. All right, so now we've kind of got our position and we've got it warmed up. I want to add clarity and texture, but I don't want to do that into the background. So this is where we're going to start doing some local adjustments, right, as opposed to global. Okay, so I want to give it a little bit of clarity overall. But if I go clarity really high globally, that applies to the entire image. It's affecting the background, right? And remember those things that we talked about when you look at your image upside down. I'm going to do my upside down trick again. When you look at your image upside down, where does your eye go, right? My eye goes over here as well as the main subject, because there's a lot of contrast and brightness, and here as well. Okay, so your eye goes to areas of sharpness, which is the subject, but also areas of contrast and brightness. Okay, so I don't want to add any contrast and brightness to the background, and by increasing clarity globally, that's what's happening. So I'm going to keep that to a minimal, right? And then we're going to go and do some masking or local adjustments. Okay, so I'm going to just choose mask and then select subject and see what Lightroom comes up with. So these latest additions to Lightroom with the new masking tools are absolutely brilliant. And you can see that it's chosen. I'm going to change this overlay color to red so we can see it a little bit better. Okay, so it's chosen the tulip and a little bit of this stem. You know, I could add to that, right? I could just add another radial filter or something like that. But I'm going to invert it because I want the background, okay? And I want to affect more of everything except around the flower. I am going to add a slight radial gradient here. Okay. I just want to sort of have a little bit more around the flowers affected in the mask. Okay, so I'm just adding, or I'm subtracting from the mask. Now I want to affect the background, so I'm just going to bring the highlights down. See how that's not affecting the part that's masked. Okay, so I'm just affecting the background. That's doing a great job. Okay, I can also lower the contrast. And I find that clarity works well too, because it brings sort of that grunginess away. So I'm sort of softening the edges and then darkening everything. So you can see, I want to turn off just this tool. Okay, so look at everything that's happening here with this tool. Okay, so it's applying darkening on the edges. It's basically a custom vignette, right? So it's applying that, oops, only to the outside. Okay. Now, if I want this flower to be included more, all I need to do is expand this a little bit and just adjust it. Okay. So these are all totally editable. Right. Nothing is cooked in, right, until we export the final image. So anything we do here with a mask or any of these tools, we can go back and edit at any time. Okay. So let's take a look at the before and after, right? So that's done a great job on the background. Now I'm going to do select subject again. Actually, I'm going to copy this mask because this one did a really good job. So I'm going to duplicate this mask and I'm going to rename this one flowers. Okay. I've got to solve this radial gradient. Okay. I just want to make sure where my, that looks good. Okay. So because I inverted, I'm going to invert this. Sorry, I haven't done that yet. So I copied it and it's applying the same thing. I'm going to invert it back to the subject. And I don't know if I can invert this one. Yeah, I think I can. Yeah, but I have to change this one to add. Okay, so the radial gradient is subtracting and it doesn't really work on here. So if I invert it, I don't get any of that. So I have to redo that one and do an add as opposed to subtract. Okay. So when you add things to your mask, like radial filters like this, sometimes it gets tricky and you have to, when you're inverting stuff, okay? So you have to figure out if you're adding or subtracting, just turn the overlay on. Okay? Now to reset, because I don't want to do the same adjustments, just double click the word effect, okay? Now this is where I want clarity. Okay? See how that's affecting the middle part? And texture. And actually, I might not want this radial filter in hindsight. Okay, because see how it's affecting the stems here? So I'm actually going to get rid of that. So it's just affecting the flowers. Okay. So now you can see it's really picking up the frost there. And if I zoom in, okay, can you see what that's doing? Really enhancing the texture and all the beads of frost and dew that's on that flower. Okay. So let's do another before and after. I mentioned a vignette, so I am going to add a vignette using one of my presets. If you could please share the presets, our Lightroom presets, Rob. This is just a post-crop vignette, and the preset, all the preset does is changes the settings. So as I click the different presets, look what happens to the sliders over on the right. Okay? And when you hover over your presets in Lightroom, it'll give you a preview. Okay, so try to avoid doing things like vignettes like this, okay, because it's really obvious, okay? So very rarely would I ever do something like that. So I think medium in this case does a nice job, right? So now we've really come in to these flowers and focusing in on them. And I may change my mind on cropping now. Let's put this one more like that, right? What do you guys think? Do you prefer it with more on the left or more on the right? Now that I've done the editing, I think I prefer this crop, okay? So re-examine your crop once you've done a bit of editing, because you might change your mind like I just did, okay? All right, let's see what everybody is saying in the chat here. Marguerite in Ontario, and in Vancouver, Lynn in Australia, Lynette in Australia, nice to see you. Okay, so Anne's using Photoshop and Camera Raw, Lightroom Luminar for Sheila, Lightroom LRC, so that is Lightroom Classic, Ruth, okay. Marguerite, Lightroom Classic, Photoshop, Lightroom Classic, do play in Photoshop, awesome. Okay, Lightroom Classic. Stephanie says, okay, it was on a tripod and that was wide open for that shutter speed. Okay. Okay, so you were on a tripod. Okay, great. So if you're on a tripod then and the flowers aren't moving, assuming that they're steady, then you don't have to worry as much. But I mean, if they're blowing a little bit in the wind, then good call on keeping the faster shutter speed. Right? If you want less of the background in focus, so more of it blurrier, you have a longer lens on that one, Stephanie. So you could have actually backed up a little bit and zoomed in, and that would have made the background more out of focus. So I know you're limited with aperture on that one, but try using the longer focal length because that will make a difference as well. Kelly, profiles are great. Didn't know they were there until you started watching. Awesome. Okay, I'm glad you picked that up. And Stephanie says she likes, oops, Trish and Stephanie both like this crop. Okay, so it seems to be this is the consensus. All right. And Linda Marguerite says pointing right towards the right of the frame. Yeah, I like them coming over like this as opposed to the other way as well. Merle likes this one. Okay, so great. All right. Consensus on this one is this is a good crop. Okay. Now that I've done this, I want to go back to the basic panel because I want to see what happens if I do cool it down and make it back sort of the color that it was, right? So look at the difference, right? If we cool it down, it feels literally, when you talk about cool colors, we're talking about blue and magenta, but the difference is that it actually feels colder, right? With the frost. So it's no surprise where they get that expression from, cool and warm colors, okay? This one might be actually fun to play with some textures, Stephanie, because you've already got some textures here on the tulips, or we could actually play with adding some bokeh. Okay, so if we want, let's leave it cool like this. We could also play with some HSL to see if we can adjust the colors a little bit. Right now, the cool thing with Lightroom HSL, which is hue, saturation, and luminance, is it gives you this little targeted tool. Okay, so if you click on it and then put your mouse over the color that you want to affect, like see, just as I move around, how it's highlighting the different sliders. So if I put my mouse here, I can increase or decrease the saturation of purple. Okay. I can also increase or decrease the saturation of the yellow and the green. Okay, so we can have less of the green. Okay, see how it's really affecting yellow? Let's just dial that down a little bit. We could also darken the leaves a little bit this way. So again, bringing more attention to the flower, right? Now that we know what colors are in it, I'm going to guess there's some red in there too. Not very much. So it looks like it's mostly purple and magenta. Okay, so we can brighten it. We can add saturation. We can also shift the color. Okay, so if we want them to be redder, right, we can shift the color this way. We can shift the yellows. We can actually make it more blue, sort of blue tone, so it feels cooler. Okay, so you can do a lot of playing around with this hue saturation tool. Okay, see, that's off and on. So again, I'm affecting this stem here, and I didn't have to do any sort of brush work to darken those colors. Okay, just using these HSLs. Okay, we can go even farther with it. Let's see, now the stems are minimized. See that? So I like that. Awesome. Let's see what else I might do on this one. We could add a little bit of sharpness. Okay, and I've demonstrated this one before, but if you drag the sharpening slider up, it's going to sharpen everywhere. And by everywhere, I mean everywhere in the image. Here, let me show you this. Okay, so when you're doing a mask, right, a mask is white when it's applying the entire effect. So wherever it's white, this effect is being applied. Okay, so I'm holding down my Alt Option key here. So the mask is being, or the sharpening is being applied everywhere. Okay, I'm going to take it up to an extreme and just zoom in a little bit. So when we look at this, actually, let's go even more extreme. Okay, so see how it's kind of sharpening everywhere, but it's also creating like some grain and picking up grain that almost isn't even there, right? Because when we are doing the mask at 0, it applies to the entire image. But this slider here, as I drag it up, I'm still holding the Alt Option key, the higher I go, the more targeted it is to edges of things. Okay, so when I hold down again Alt Option and click the slider, it's showing me now that it's just applying to the edges. So if I zoom into that same area, okay, so see how it's smoother in here? Now, I would not go to this degree of sharpening. That is a crazy amount of sharpening. Okay, let me just show you what that's doing. And if we look over here at the flower, see how it's sharpening the flower, and less stuff over here. We could even take the mask up higher. Okay, so it's not affecting these smooth areas. Look at the difference. So sharpness, masking 0. See how it's all grainy in here? When I remove the masking or increase the masking, it's removing it from smoother areas. So that would be like sky, also skin, right? If you have a person in your picture, okay? So make sure when you're using the sharpening slider to use masking as well, okay? Let's see. So pretty much that's about all I would do in Lightroom. We could do some color grading. The only other thing I might add here is a texture, okay? But I'm going to leave that to Stephanie to play with, or maybe a bokeh, all right? Now this one, while we're on the summer theme of flowers again, we seem to be on a summer theme, except for Trish, who's sent us a glacier, and I'm going to come to that one as well. And did this image of some flowers or some dead flowers coming out of an envelope, right? So it's a really cool image to begin with. There's a lot right with this image, and like you've got some beautiful composition, right, coming in. It's diagonal. I actually couldn't figure this out from the image that you posted in the group because it was so abstracted almost when you finished it, right? Then I want to show you what she created out of it. Look at that. Okay, so that's Anne's finished image. I'm not sure that I can do anything better than that, Anne, but let's just see what I can come up with, right? Because it looks like she's Stephanie. Excellent. Yes, wabi sabi. For those of you that don't know what wabi sabi is, if you could please share that article for Ray, Rob, because he's confused was to Wabi Sabi. Basically, Wabi Sabi, I just did an article on that, which is embracing the art of imperfection. So things like this flower, which is not perfect, it's slightly dying, and things which are images which are not perfect as well. So it's about the art of embracing imperfection, right? Because as photographers, we tend to get a little carried away with perfection. Now that I'm looking at this, I want to see if she moved this little petal over here. Aha, you did. See, but the petal is here and she's moved it over there. Okay, so it looks like she's done a selection and changed the background and the overlay here. Okay, so I'd love to hear from you, Anne, as to how you did that, because I know how you did it. But people that are a bit newer to Photoshop and Lightroom, you cannot do those kinds of things in Lightroom. Okay, so you have to go to Photoshop for that. Okay. Yes, Anne, you should definitely put that on the Wabi Sabi one. Brandon, nice to see you from Calgary. How's the weather down there? And I think this was in regards to the tulip. Looks like it's coming out of the image and you can touch it. Awesome. Okay, so that's that very, it's a tactile feeling, right? Where you can actually feel the image. Okay. So that means she's done a great job taking the picture to begin with, right? So I can't stress that enough in terms of I can do all kinds of editing and you can do all kinds of editing, but you have to have a good image to start with. And that's what Anne has done here as well. Okay, so now she's taking the flower concept to the next level where she's chosen these sort of dead ones and arranged them in a way that is very pleasing, okay? I agree, Sheila. She is rocking Photoshop. She absolutely is. So that's your secret, right, Anne? Play Neil Diamond in the background. Can't go wrong with that. I'm not going to start singing, don't worry. So let me take a look at this one because, again, I'm not sure that I would do anything different. But if I had not seen Anne's picture, it's hard not to see it because it's really cool. When I see this, I definitely think sort of old and grungy, and I would definitely shift the colors, right? So I'm going to do my shift double click on the whites and the blacks. Why that didn't go up there, I don't know. Okay, so expanding that. See how it's pulling the histogram over? Okay, and then the blacks, I want to have a little bit more black. We could also go a little softer on this one. Now, I don't think that's a white envelope. So if I do the white eyedropper on here, it's going to end up really blue. And my vision of it, like just seeing this, is that it's fairly yellow and I want it to go with that tone, right? So I'm going to stick with that. I'm going to neutralize it just a tiny little bit here. And maybe a little bit of green. Okay. I might crop in a tiny bit because this is what's called negative space, right? And she's got a really good handle on using the negative space. I'm going to come in just a tiny little bit, not very much. And it might even come in a little bit on the envelope because we don't need as much of this envelope. So I'm just going to come in like that. Let's try that. Okay, so just coming in a little bit. Yeah, honestly, there's not a lot I would do in Lightroom because I find that for me, Lightroom is more of my base editor. And then once I decide what I want to do with something, I would take it either into Luminar or into Photoshop. Okay. Now she's taken it into Photoshop, and we can certainly do that. So I'm going to give it a little bit of clarity. And I want to do a select subject here and see if Lightroom picks out the subject, picks out the flowers. Okay, it looks like it did. I'm going to change back to green. Can you see why I'm changing the color of the overlay? Because I can't move it apparently. Okay, so if I change it to something different, there we go. Right, this is just showing me an overlay. Okay, so actually I like that version. I want it to look like that, to be honest. Right, so I can just have it show me what's selecting in green or what's selecting over white, okay? Or a black and white image, okay? So I like the color overlay, but I find that sometimes red doesn't show up as well. So you can change the color of what's being shown, okay? Now I just want the flower and I don't want the table. So see how it's selected a little bit of this part of the table here, okay? So what I can do is subtract, and I'm going to subtract a luminance range, okay? So luminance range is brightness range. And then when I select the color of the table, I'm going to draw a little square. Right? So it's going to subtract that luminance range or darkness. See how that worked? And then I have the ability to adjust the tones. Okay? So if I want less of the white tones, I want to just make sure I'm getting a good chunk of this table. Okay? See how that worked? So if I turn that luminance range off, so I've got a tickle in my nose. So I've helped to just limit the mask to the flowers. Now it is getting a little bit of this paper here, so I can try and eliminate that. I can do another subtract. And let me just see. There's a couple ways I could try this. I could try luminance range again, but I feel like if I select this, it's going to go over the flowers. Actually, it did a good job. See that? So I kept it on a bright area, right? And it did a good job of just selecting that white part and minimizing it or erasing it from my mask. So now all of that was to select just the flowers, where I'm going to add some clarity and some texture. Okay? Because I didn't want texture added to this table. Okay? In fact, I want to actually get rid of some texture on the table, if anything. Okay? So I'm going to do a second mask, and we could increase the contrast on the flowers by bringing the whites up a little bit and the blacks down a little bit. You see that blue showing up here? I'm just pressing J on the keyboard to get the highlight warning showing up so that I make sure I'm not clipping anything. So see how that's brightening the flowers? Okay. I'm going to do one more mask, and this time I'm going to do color range because I want to get all this brown table. Okay, so see how it's done a really good job of selecting that. And then you've got this refine slider. If it's selected too much, I want to get the shadows. Okay, so I can just refine it a little bit. And in this case, I'm going to lower the texture and the clarity. So see how that's affecting the table? Okay, so I can actually minimize this table, and I liked how it was sort of black, so I can actually desaturate it and darken it. And take it even further. You could probably just make it, there we go. So look at that. So now we've basically created them on black, and that's just that mask affecting the table. Okay. So there's multiple different ways. If you could share the class that we did with Pete Venenine on these masking tools. We have a 6-hour class just on using these masking tools and making these kinds of selections. So if you take your time when you're doing these selections, you can really get specific over how you can affect your image. Right? See how I'm just affecting the table, right? So I can take the sharpness down on the table, the clarity, the texture, and bring it down to something that's almost black, okay, like so. Now, if I want to do the same kinds of things to the paper, I could do a second mask, or I can just add to this one. Okay, so if I add to this one, and we did luminance range, okay, and we turn the overlay on. Okay, so it's picked up the flowers, so that needs to be fixed. I don't want to get the flowers. So no matter what I do here, I'm getting the flowers. I can also do subtract subject, and it will delete the flowers. Right? Now we're getting close, right? So all of these things are trying to get the maximum amount of the paper chosen and the background. So luminance range, I found that was not working. So I'm going to get rid of the luminance range. I'm going to try color range as well. Okay, so we're going to do add color range and get the envelope. Right. I want to make sure I'm not getting the flowers. There we go. So that's pretty close. Right. If I turn this off, if you're not sure if your mask is working, take your adjustments to an extreme. Okay, so see how it is getting some of the flowers? Well, that's kind of interesting. So when I took this slider up, we get something sort of post-apocalyptic looking, right? So sometimes you get happy accidents. What I'm looking for is it is affecting the flowers, and it's sort of missing the edge here. So I want to be careful when I darken it that I'm not getting the flowers. Okay, so how can I adjust that? Can I fix this color range one? It's getting a little bit of the flowers, so let's dial that back a little bit. And is this one getting the flowers? A little bit, okay. So I can actually do one more thing where I select subject, but it's going to take this away too. So we're getting pretty close here. So I like what's happening with this, okay. I like what's happening there. And let's do an edge vignette. And this one here is where we could actually use the super strong. Okay, so we can darken it down and that will help that paper. Right? So I like what Anne did with the overlay. Let's do a similar one, but let's do something different. So I'll go through the process with you of doing an overlay in Photoshop. And let me just fix my exposure here. So once I've done my tweaking with my mask, always come back and just double check your overall exposure. Okay. This one's getting a little bit dark here, but I'm not going to worry about it too much. Okay. See how my mask is, or my vignette is getting that a little bit. So I could just scale my vignette a little bit larger, a little bit softer. Okay. So to head over to Photoshop, we want to right click and we're going to choose Edit In and Open as a Smart Object. How many of you that are watching have done the Photoshop class? I know a few of you have. Let's see. Are there LUTs in Lightroom? That's a tricky question. No, there aren't. And this would definitely be a good image to apply a LUT to. The easier way to do it is to just go to Photoshop. Okay, so you can apply a LUT in Photoshop easily, but not easily in Lightroom is the answer. Right. It does kind of look like they're floating, right? And because she did so much editing on it, yeah, I didn't realize they were sitting on a table as well. Can you watch that episode? Which one, Anne? The masking. It's not part of the Lightroom or the Photoshop class. It was one that we did with Pete Van and I. And it was 2 3-hour classes that were webinars that it's now available as just that. Yeah. Yeah, you definitely could try this one in Neo, right? Because you could do the LUT and the overlay there as well. All right, so now we're in Photoshop. And let me just get rid of my rulers and get my tools over here. So I have a couple of different workspaces set up, and this is something I talked about in the Photoshop class as well, right? So I have one set up for when I'm working with 2 monitors, which I have my laptop and my other screen. So you guys are on my big screen here, and then my laptop is over here, right? So that's why you see me kind of looking over here. So when I'm editing in Photoshop, I'm usually working with my laptop with the full image and just the toolbar. So all I have is the toolbar and the image. And then these tools are all on my second monitor. Okay. So if you have 2 monitors, you can definitely set up your workspace so that you have more real estate on the image and you can make it larger screen because these tools take up a lot of space. I'm just going to make them a little bit smaller. There we go. Okay, so I open it as a smart object. So you see this little icon in the bottom corner here, right? So if we want to add a LUT, for example, if you go into adjustments, there is one here. Okay, so gradient map, selective color, threshold, posterize, invert, color lookup. Okay, so where it says color lookup, and you may not even know this one, Anne. Okay, so that's basically a LUT. Okay, it's a lookup table. Okay, so see when you click on lookup, okay, so it's asked me, do I want to load one? Okay, so it comes with several built in. Okay, or I can add my own. Okay, so I can go and find, where are we? I don't do this one very often. Okay, so there's a few other ones. Oh, let's try abstract. Okay, and I forget actually how to load these. I think it's up here. No. Yeah, see, I honestly don't use this one. I would go into, there we go. Okay, so whatever I clicked on here, load abstract profile or load 3D LUT. Sorry, that's where it is. So I can pick one from the menu here or load one. And now I do have the my LUTs on my desktop here. I've got my LUTs. And let me show you where's my previews. Okay, so I've got my contact sheets for one's called the Land of Freedom, which were sold by Skylum. And I did a little contact sheet. If you could show the video on that, Rob, as to how I made this. Okay, so I believe you can do previews in Photoshop. Okay, so again, this is not something I do very often, but let's just go and load a 3D LUT. And then you have to navigate to where they're located. Mine are in here. Okay, so there's the Land of Freedom LUTs. So if I choose one, right, it just applies it. But there isn't a way to sort of preview it. So that's why I made this little contact sheet, right? So I can look at that and say, okay, I want something that's orangey. I think maybe Odessa or this one here. Okay, Dnipro or Dnipro. I'm not even going to begin to try and pronounce some of these words. Okay, so I'm going to add it again, and I'm going to go find that one. Okay, so now it's very orange, right? So when you've added it, it comes in as a layer, right? And as an adjustment on this layer. So now I can do things like change the opacity of it, okay? Same that you can do in Luminar. That would be the amount slider, okay? I can also change the blend mode, right? And as I just sort of hover over, you can see how it changes the look of the image, okay? So it's definitely adding a lot of orange. Let's try one of the abstract ones that's built in here. Let's see. Pastel. Let's see. Okay, so pastel is kind of cool. Sepia. So these ones are built into Photoshop. Okay. Okay, now keep in mind that I've lowered my opacity here. So if I want to see what they're doing, I need to go back to full opacity. Okay, so sepia, pastel. Ooh, that's interesting. That's very interesting. Let's play with that. Okay, so now let's see what happens if we change our blend modes. Okay, so you can get some really bizarre things happening. It's almost like opposite, right? Luminosity, right? Now we're getting some cross processing, some really interesting sort of looks here. Right? Wasn't expecting that. That's kind of interesting. Let's try golden blue. Oh, that's kind of cool. Right? That's kind of cool. And let's just play with the blend mode. So the possibilities here literally are limitless, right? You can play with this thing forever, right? We can go crazy with our creativity on these things, right? So definitely play around with some of these tools that you've not used before, right? I kind of like that. Okay, I kind of like that. Maybe we'll just lower the opacity of it a little bit. Okay, but it's a layer, right? So you can always turn it off, change the blend mode, change the opacity, all of those things, okay? I do want to add a texture. Okay, now I have some textures in Lightroom. I have them in my computer actually, and I've got our Cuba textures. I need to find my folder of textures. Here we go, textures. Oh, do I even have them in here? Maybe I do not. Well, I've got a lot of textures that I've basically collected. So let's just see if one of my Cuba textures is going to work. So to find my textures here, I've got to go to my Explorer, so my mag finder, and my textures are in my folder here. I've also got the bokehs. Okay, so here's my texture overlays. So let's just see if any of these, I'm just kind of scrolling through them, grab me and speak to me in terms of the flowers. That might be interesting. Okay. These are all images that I shot in Cuba. So this is part of our Cuba texture pack. If you want to share a link to that, please, Rob. And also our ultimate editing pack, which includes bokehs and textures. Peeling paint, I don't know. See, to me, it looks more abstract, something like this. Right? I feel the dripping, the thing that was dripping, it like the flowers are kind of melting almost, right? So I'm going to go back to this one that was up here and go with this one. Okay, so to add it to Photoshop, you can do a couple of different things. You can literally just grab it and drag it and drop it in, or you can go File, Place Embedded, okay, and then you have to find it. This is actually where I would use Bridge. Okay, so if I want to browse these a little bit better, I'm just going to drag this folder over to Bridge, which is part of your Adobe suite. So if you have Lightroom and you have the photographer's package, you basically have Bridge as well. Okay? And when I change my viewing, of course, it pops over to my other screen. Let me just adjust that. Okay, so this is where I would use Bridge. Come back over here, okay, as opposed to my Finder window, because now I can see the previews. Okay, so I can see the thumbnails and I can go, okay, yes, I want that. There's also some with a brick pattern, which might be kind of interesting, but I still think I'm going to like this dripping one. Okay, so I'm just going to drag it over into Photoshop and drop it. So when you do that, it will drop it full size. And once I hit apply, it adds it as a new layer as a smart object. Okay, so if I resize it, it's going to maintain the proper quality of the original image. Okay, if you don't put it in as a smart object, for example, if you open both of them and you copy it and paste it, it will not be a smart object. Okay, let me just show you what happens if I do that. So I'm going to rasterize this, or what's called like applying any edits. So it's now not a smart object. I'm going to resize it, this layer, really small, okay? And then hit enter, okay? So you can see that I've sized it really small. And now I've changed my mind. Now I want to put it back. Okay, so when I resize it, you're going to see what happens. Okay, so when I hit enter, it's not as obvious on this one, but what happens is it starts to get really pixelated, right? Because you're actually shrinking the image and then expanding it. So if I drag this back in and put it on top, we should see an image difference or an image quality difference. Not much, right? In this case, because it's abstract anyways, but whenever you're adding a new image, definitely make sure you leave it as a smart object, because you will lose quality if you size it down and then back up again, okay? So that wasn't the best example, but now we've got this added. I want to change my blend mode. So I'm just going to kind of scroll through, and I want it to apply to the background, right? So I'm going to choose lighten or somewhere in one of these modes here. Okay, because it's going to apply mostly to that dark area. Ooh, that's interesting. Okay, so we're getting something very sort of more abstract. Okay. Ooh, that's interesting too. I kind of like one of these, and then I'm just going to lower the opacity. And you can do that using your keyboard shortcuts. If you have the move tool, which is V on your keyboard, then you can just press the number key. So just by pressing 5, it changes the opacity to 50%. 3 changes it to 30%, right? Now I can also change the color of this, right? So it's coming out really sort of blue, right? I could actually invert this entire thing, right? So now it's basically a negative. So I just did Command or Control I, which is invert, right? So if I turn all these things off and change this blend mode, okay, so I basically, that's what it looks like. I'm inverting the entire thing into a negative. So you have so much options. Oops, see, look at how many inverted I've done. Apply to the smart object here. Let's put these back on. Okay, so you have so many options. And now, of course, we can use our mask on here and brush it in or out, right? I can also decide if I want to flip the image. Maybe I want to transform it and flip it this way so that the stuff is over here, right? That's kind of cool. I kind of like this stuff over here, though, right? It looks kind of neat. It just adds to the whole, okay, it's a dying sort of look, right? Now, if I don't like that texture, I can just turn it off and say, well, let's try a different one. This is another one that I thought might be good, or one of these that have sort of a crackle texture. But let's try this one. So again, just drop it. Okay. And once you've applied it, I can do rotating. Anything you do to a layer, you need to do transform, okay? Because if I rotate the whole thing, I can't just rotate from here because it'll rotate the flowers as well, okay? So always do transform and then rotate from here, or you can scale it, okay? I want to change the blend mode. Okay? Let's try. Again, we're going to be somewhere in maybe down in this mode here. So I want to blend these together. Ooh, that's interesting. That's interesting. I kind of like that, but let's just play with the opacity a little bit. So look at how that's making the flowers. So I really lowered the opacity, and now it's almost like they've been photographed against a black wall, right? So it totally changes the look of this image. Very interesting. We could definitely mask the flowers out as well so that they're not as affected or at all affected, right? That's kind of neat. And what happens if I like this idea, but I don't like how it's sort of going blue, right? We can apply another adjustment, and I can actually do hue saturation, drag the saturation down to 0. Now you see that it's applying to everything. But if I do what's called a clipping layer, so see how there's a little pointer, little finger there when you hold your thing between the two layers. Hold down your Alt Option key, and it changes to a square with a little down arrow, only when you're in between there. See that? So when you hold Alt Option and click that, it becomes what's called a clipping mask. Okay, so basically I've dialed the saturation down, and black and white would have been a better choice here, but anyways, now this black and white, or this desaturated, is only applying to the texture layer. Okay, so it's not applying to the flowers below, it's only applying to the texture layer. Okay? So basically what I've done is I've added texture without adding color. Like so. Yeah, a better option would have been probably a black and white adjustment layer. So that's kind of cool as well. I could see adding some text on here, maybe a poem. And I like what Anne did in terms of adding sort of the overlay with the words on it, or music sheets, things like that. Okay. Once you're done, whatever you're doing in Photoshop, you just have to click save. And this is a mistake that a lot of people make, is they try and do a save as here, and it doesn't come back in Lightroom. Okay, so if you want it to come back to Lightroom, you just have to save and then close. Now it's going to take a moment. It will close as soon as it's done saving and then come back to Lightroom. But I think there's some questions here. So let me just get over into, now I got to go find my image again. Where are we? Okay, so see, it didn't come back into Lightroom, and I think that's because it didn't come into this collection, but there it is. Okay, so see, if you're in a collection, it may not get added. Let me just see. Nah, it didn't get added to the collection, so I'll just add it to the collection. Okay, now we have our edited version. Okay. All right. Oh, Rob had to feed the cats and get more coffee. Every brushstroke creates a new vision. Yeah. And sometimes like things like this, like images like this, and we've kind of gone, you know, far with 2 images today, and I want to do Trisha's as well with her glacier. You can really just keep on playing. But an image like this and like Stephanie's are great because the imagination that you can have with these images, right? Loving the two-tone. So we've got a tulip theme going on today. Kelly, think outside the box. Yes. I try just, instead of trying to force it, you know, just ask yourself this question. What if? Okay. That's the question you want to think about. What if? If you have to remind yourself, print it on a big piece of paper, right? And put it in front of where you're working and just say, what if? What if I do that? What if I try this? What if I go over there? Right? Try blend modes, try masking, right? And just see what happens. You can't mess it up. Yes, Anne is in Canada. Let's see. Sheila and Anne are chatting about tulips. Yes, there's a group that Anne is a part of called the Framers, where she's doing a frame or a picture every day. Right? Does it go back into Lightroom as a PSD? Yes, it did. And that's because that's what I have set up in my Lightroom preferences. Okay, so inside here, you will tell Lightroom how to handle those things. Okay, so it's under external editing, right? So I have it set up to, if I go to Photoshop, to come back as a PSD in ProPhoto color space. So you set up those things here. Okay, but I definitely recommend a PSD over a TIFF. TIFFs are generally bigger files. They both will allow you to use layers and keep layers, right? But this PSD will be a little bit smaller. I don't have a personal use for TIFFs. I rarely use them unless I'm going directly to Luminar and back, then I have a TIFF, right? So that's where I set up the PSD. Uh-oh, Sheila, number one offender of the save as. Save a copy. And that is fine. And that's what you have to do if you've opened the image directly into Photoshop. But if you've opened it from Lightroom, you just need to do save, okay? Because otherwise it will save as somewhere, but Lightroom doesn't know about it, okay? That's why it's not coming back into Lightroom. What if you had my eye? Well, then I'd only have one eye, Anne. Come on. Let's be serious. When taking an image from Lightroom to Photoshop, when should I simply open it in Photoshop and when should I turn it into a smart object? That's a great question. Okay. So the first one I opened as a smart object, okay, because then anything you do to the layers, if you add any filters, okay, they're smart objects, meaning you can come back and edit that filter later, including applying Luminar Neo or any other plugin such as Topaz as a filter, okay. Now that I've got this one open though as a PSD, if I want to change something here, this is when I'm going to open it directly into Photoshop, okay. So if I choose edit in as a smart object, it's going to make a new version for me, and any of the layers that I had before will be gone, okay? But if I choose edit in Photoshop and edit the original, okay, it's going to open that same PSD, and the layers that I had there before are going to still be there, okay? See that? Where's my layers? Okay, so everything that I did before is still there. right? So now I might decide, well, let's go back to the other texture, okay? And if I want the black and white to apply to that texture, I just have to drag it down there and set my clipping mask. Okay? So anything that I do now, when I save and close, it will go back to Photoshop. Okay. The reason for the smart filter is, let's just say, I'm going to turn the black and white off. I kind of liked it the way it was. All right, so let's just say I want to apply a filter on here. Okay, so I'm going to go filter. I can't even think of what I want to apply on here. Okay, maybe I want to twirl, or let's do liquefy. Actually, let's do liquefy, just for fun. We're going to make a Salvador Dali version of Anne's flowers. Right. So liquefy allows us to push things around and twirl things and pucker them and so on. Okay, so I can literally just decide that I want to do some funky stuff. Let's just twirl these around. Okay, and we got pucker. So we can shrivel this one even more. Let's puff this one up. Let's puff this one up. Okay, so we're just kind of having some fun with this. Let's go the other way. I forgot how to swirl the other way now. This one is push. Okay, so I can just push things sideways. Nah, that's not working. I'm just playing around, literally. Let's see. Not so much. Let's pucker this one. All right, so I'm just playing around, adjusting, and playing around here with liquefy. Oh, that's better. Okay, so this is being applied as a filter. Okay. So when I hit OK, because it's a smart object, that's kind of cool, Anne. You might have to go liquefy, Anne. Right? So liquefy is one thing that Luminar does not have yet. That may be something that they do. Interestingly enough, for you, those of you that use Luminar, I've actually had 2 meetings this week with the some of the staff of Skylum. I met with the 2 ladies yesterday, and we chatted about all kinds of things. And I'm not allowed to talk about any of it, but I just find, and I told them this, that it's really cool that they reach out to their partners and also people who are using Luminar to get their feedback and, what do you want the program to do? And they're very available. And I love that about the company. So people say lots of negative things about Skylum. I think they're fantastic because I don't get to ever talk with Adobe. Nobody ever wants my opinion on Adobe. All right. So now that we've done liquefy, okay, it shows up here on this layer. See that? As a filter. If that was applied to the layer directly, not as a smart object, I couldn't do this. Okay, so I couldn't turn it off or I couldn't reactivate it. So when I reactivate it, it comes back where I left off. Okay, so let me just say, okay, I want to do a little bit more because I didn't go far enough or something. Because I want to do this. Okay, so now I'm just getting crazy, right? But I like the idea of, warping and so on, but with the smart object, it allows me to reactivate any filters that I've applied. Okay, this looks like a dinosaur, like a tooth. It looks like a tooth now. So I might rethink that one, but I just wanted to show you how that works. So now again, all I have to do is save, okay? And then once it's saved, right, you'll see it at the bottom here, saving 99%. And when it's done, that goes away. Okay, then close, and it will close once it's done saving. Okay, so it's saving over the original PSD, but because I have the layers and because I have the smart objects, anything that I've done to it, I can come back to that same point again. Okay, so then when I come back to Lightroom, it's now updated with that new version. I hope that answers the question for you, Marguerite, about smart objects. Okay. Same with Luminar, it doesn't come back to your collection. Try if you're in a collection and you've got things sorted, it's possible that they're just sorted in the wrong way. So it should have come into the collection. Usually it does, and I was surprised that this one didn't. But if it doesn't come back into your collection, just go to the original folder like I did and find it and add it to the collection. You also may find that how you have your stuff sorted, right? So if I had sorted by file name, for example, then it should show up next to it. Okay. But if you have it sorted by some other way, it might show up down the bottom here at the end of your collection. Okay. So just check that it's not at the end or in somewhere else. Okay. Crazy is good. All right, so I want to do Trisha's image. We've done all these flowers. Now, Michael, I wanted to address yours as well. So we're going to go a little bit longer today. I'm feeling inspired. So Michael sent these two images, and I'm not sure what you want me to do with these, Michael, because they're already edited JPEGs. So I can comment on them because I know your one thing said that you have a tendency to go too far. And the one comment I would have about this one is that I can tell it's edited because there's some, see how it's lighter under the dock here, and the sky, it's darker up here and it's lighter in this midsection. Okay. So whatever you've done in terms of selecting the sky, it missed these bits in here. Okay. So that's where you have to really kind of refine the selection like I did with the masking, and use those tools, use the luminance and the color selection tools to get in all these little bits here. Okay. The other thing I would say is that your corners are a little dark. Okay, so be careful when you're doing vignettes. I'm going to darken overall so that you can see it. Okay, so see how the corners are darker? Now that could be from your lens corrections. So definitely make sure that you have these things turned on, right? And if need be, adjust this devignette amount here. Okay, so if I see that, so it could be a lens default or something defect that's darkening the corners. Okay, see that? And then you just have to darken the image overall. So when you're shooting, make sure you don't put a lens hood on the wrong way, or that's affecting the corners and darkening. And when you put a vignette on using your post-crop vignette in effects, make sure that the corners don't look overly dark. Okay, the key is always you don't want it to look like it's been edited. Okay. This one here, the corners are good. Okay, so see some things happen here. The corners are a good density. I do notice that the image is crooked, or it looks crooked. So I'm looking at this as the horizon, and I feel like I want to do that. Okay, so let's just do a little correction. Otherwise, I think your editing here is great. So if you've edited this one already, which it looks like, okay, I don't see any problems here. Maybe a slight halo around the shell, and we could do a select subject here, and it did select the shell well. So I'm going to add a bit more clarity and texture. Okay, see how that is just bringing out the crunchiness of the shell, right? Let me zoom in a little bit so you can see that. You see the difference in the shell, off, on. So that was just that select subject. Oops. Close my histogram. If I want to darken the sky, we can try select sky. And this is what's so great about these tools. And I know that Luminar is going to be adding something similar. They're going to be adding their masking tool, hopefully very soon. See how darkening that sky a little bit. See how if I go too far, it starts to get gray. That's because it's a JPEG. And I don't know if you are shooting RAW or JPEG. If you have edited already and sent me a JPEG, then I want your originals for future. So the original exactly as it came out of the camera as a RAW file. Okay. Then if we want to add a vignette to this one, you want to make sure again that your vignettes don't look obvious. Okay, so you don't want to come in and do something like this. Right? That's why I always do this part where I sort of feather. And this is a perfect example of where I would actually do a custom vignette, or in Luminar, you can move it around because you can't off center it in Lightroom. And so instead of doing that, I might do a radial mask around the shell, something like that, and then just invert it. So I'm affecting everything around it, and then just darken slightly. Okay. So see how the sky is sort of gone a little bit gray? Again, that is because of the JPEG. If you had a bit more information in the file, I can try and shift the color here a little bit. So I went back to that same mask. Okay, so I can rename this so you know that this is the sky. So I'm editing the sky, and I'm just going to add some color to it because of that grayness. Okay, so let me see. So when you select this little tool at the bottom here, okay, normally it's got an X in it. Okay, see how it's got an X? If you click that, you can pick any color of the rainbow. So because it was looking a little gray, right, I can also make it blue if I want blue sky instead. But I want to kind of go with the color that's already there. Something like that. Okay. So that makes up for that sort of sky that's looking really washed out in the background. Okay. I want to punch up the blue a little bit in here, and I can do that probably with HSL. Okay. So I can just do saturate. See how that's affecting the water a little bit. Okay. And I still feel like it's crooked, right? I can't tell, where the horizon is. This the horizon, or is that the horizon? I'm fooled. I think it's an optical illusion, right? So I'm not sure if that's the horizon with the cloud, right? So I'm going to draw a line from this part over to this part, okay? And I also see a spot over here. You see these spots? Right? These are dust spots. And I just did a video on the cloning and healing tool. And thanks to everybody that attended last week, because we talked about, or 2 weeks ago, we had talked about this tool, and people's questions turned into a video. So if you could please share the video I just did on using the spot removal tool in Lightroom, Rob, please. Okay. So that's kind of what I did with your image there, Michael. Okay. So if you've got the raw image, you'd probably be able to pull out more color out of the sky, but this is a great composition, focused really well. Okay. Only thing is, I just want to have the raw file. Okay. Good exposure, 2.8, nice and sharp, nice shallow depth of field, right? Nicely done. Okay, so we've been to the beach and we've had some dead flowers. Now let's go to the glacier. So I'd love to know where you photographed these, Trish, because they're really cool. Excellent, Marguerite. We will definitely be asking questions, and I'll be doing the same process. So you'll have lessons to watch, and you can submit questions ahead of time, or you'll be able to do questions live like we did in the Luminar Neo. I agree, Kelly. Lots of cool images today. Yeah, you guys are getting really, really creative. Okay, so Trish. Okay, now I'm guessing we are Antarctic. I think she said she flew over. Was it? Let me see her notes here. Where's your question? Okay, so taken from a helicopter over a glacier. I'm struggling because there's nothing in particular that stands out in either, yet they're amazing feats of nature. I've submitted 2 as they're a bit different. I was hoping that one has potential. Can you help? All right, let's have a look and see. West coast of the South Island. Okay, very cool. All right, so this one, a little bit wider. And I agree, there's sort of nothing for the eye to land on because it's a lot of sameness, right? So there's a lot of patterns, and really good job on getting this nice high shutter speed, Trish, because when you're in a helicopter, there's going to be lots of vibration, right? So good job on getting that really fast shutter speed. Okay, so I wanted to mention that to start. And this is the image of the two that I think has more potential because it's more detailed. But I think you can work on both. And I'm going to work on this one and then just see if I copy and paste the settings and see what happens. Right. All right. So she's used classic chrome setting and she's shooting with a Fuji. Not a girl. All right. So I'm going to try Astia or Provia. Those are sort of my go-tos on my camera settings. See how the chrome was a little bit less blue. So I'm going to go with Astia, okay, which tends to be soft color. And now the one thing you'll notice here, okay, what color is glacier and what color is snow? It should be white, right? So when you're shooting something like this, okay, what mode were you shooting in, Trish? Were you in aperture priority? Yes. Okay, so she was in aperture priority on 0 exposure bias. Okay, so this is all the metadata I could see from her camera, what she shot, what lens she used, all of these things. And this is helpful. So when you're looking at your own images later, look at this stuff and say, okay, what did I do here and what was the result? Right? This is a learning experience, right? So when you're using aperture priority, if you could please share the article on why is my snow gray, because this is actually a perfect example, Trish, because when you're shooting this, right, I'm just going to turn it to black and white for a minute because there's actually nothing white in this image currently, okay? Everything is slightly light gray, but mostly middle gray, okay? So lots of middle gray tones, okay? And when you're looking at the histogram on your camera, okay, it's going to show you that as well. And when you're photographing something that's all white, your camera gets tricked. Okay, what metering mode did you use? Average. Okay, so you've got all the right settings except for one. Okay, so if you are in a situation like this again, where the scene that you're shooting is all white like this, okay, you need to put your exposure compensation up a little bit. So you might want to be at 0.6 or +1. Okay, so plus 0.6 or +1. So what that's going to do essentially is I'll just dial in exposure +1. Okay, now look, now your snow is white and we're still not off the graph. Okay, so this is about a stop underexposed because your camera gets tricked because it's white. Okay, but I'm actually not going to use this one. I'm going to use my shift double click trick. And by doing that on both the whites and the blacks, okay, see how it automatically, look at that, added more contrast as well. Okay, so now look at the histogram. We've got a lot more white and brighter colors, lots of middle gray, and a little bit of dark. Okay. Now we can play around with bringing the highlights down and adding some things like texture and clarity. Okay. In this case, if we add clarity overall, remember, take your sliders to extremes. So I'm just doing this to show you what it does, but clarity up high on this one works really well. Okay, so it's adding contrast. Dehaze slider does basically the same thing. It's adding a lot of black. Okay, so you can do that with your black slider or with the dehaze slider. Okay, so even though there's no haze here, it works well on this image. And look at how blue the shadows are, and it's really starting to bring out these colors of the glacier. Can you see that? Okay, I am going to go clarity, and then texture, I'm going to go crazy with the texture because look at that. And if we come in a little bit more, look at the texture that's there. Okay, and just do a before and after. Okay. The lighting here is fantastic as well because you've got light coming from the side going going this way. So the light's coming this way and it's picking up all that texture. Okay. I'm going to make sure the lens corrections are on. Okay. Now for Fuji, generally it's always turned on, okay, because the lens profile is built in. So that's one great thing about Fuji. So it knows that. Okay. And I'm going to do a edge vignette. Again, these are in my presets. And all I'm doing by clicking that is applying these settings here. Okay. I do have another video coming soon talking specifically about this tool. So that will be helpful for you as well. Should be coming out early next week. So watch for that one, which is a good reminder to subscribe to the channel. if you haven't already, because then when we have new videos that come out, YouTube will let you know. Okay, just in case I don't remember to post them on the Facebook group. Also, if you could share a link to the Facebook, our DPM Facebook group, Rob, that would be great. I know a lot of you are already a member of that group, so that's another place where you'll see notices. And if you sign up for the Lightroom keyboard shortcuts cheat sheet, then you'll be getting my emails as well. So I don't always send an email every time I'm live because we do that every week. You just have to make sure that you hit the notifications, and YouTube will also tell you when I'm going live. Okay. So let's take a look at this. I'm going to go before. Actually, let's just go full screen here. Okay, so before and after. Okay, so those are all so far global edits. I haven't done anything with selecting a subject or anything, but let's just see what Lightroom thinks is the subject. Right? So it's always going to look for stuff that it thinks is the subject based on what's sharp. So it's kind of it's confused here because there's lots of stuff that's sharp, right? You might have wanted to use a slightly smaller aperture in this case to get more in focus. So I'm not going to use that one. If we do want to do anything specific, I might just do a radial gradient. And if anything, I'll just apply a little bit more texture and clarity in the middle of the image. And then I'm going to duplicate this one so that it's the same, but invert it so it's on the outside of the oval, and then just do another little sort of darken on the edges. Okay, so doing this versus the vignette allows me to move it around if I want, okay, and also to do other things, right? So I can do highlights only here, right, versus the vignette. I can shift the color, and I can also say I want less texture and clarity around the outside, okay? Like so. So see how that's now focusing the attention more here. Right, now that I've done all that, I'm just going to revisit the overall exposure and brighten it a little bit, right? And let's look at the white balance. We haven't really played with that yet. I can try auto, right? Took a lot of that blue out, right? Now that it's gone auto, you could see that the ice part of the glacier is blue and the snow is white. So that's actually really cool, right? So it warmed it up a lot. I think I might not go quite so far. And a little bit less pink. Right? Look at the difference before and after. Now you really see that blue, right? I'm going to scale my edge vignette back just a little bit, but something like that, okay? So in this case, Trish, I mean, ideally it would be great if there was a bird or something sitting on one of those peaks, but really the subject here is all about this texture and the feeling of how it feels cold and this raw power of nature, right? Polarizing filter. I don't know if a polarizing filter is going to actually do anything in this case, Trish, because there's really nothing to polarize. There's no, if you had the sky in the image, then yes, or if there was something that was reflecting, but I don't know if a polarizer would do anything here other than just take density here or make you have a longer exposure. So be very careful about having a polarizing filter on your lens all the time, right? Because it'll actually just cut your exposure down. Ken says, I know it's cheating, but what would happen in the basic panel if you had hit auto? Well, let's find out, Ken. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this image as a virtual copy, and I'm just going to reset everything. Okay, so back to the beginning, and let's just, I am going to change this though. Okay, so I'm going to start with that profile, and then we're just going to hit auto. Okay, so that's what it did. Okay, so it lowered the highlights, increase the shadows, increase the brights, whites, and the blacks, right, versus what I got. Okay, so it didn't do anything in terms of, you know, texture and clarity. We can still add those. Okay. Oh, it looks like this one is cropped a little bit. That's interesting. So when I reset it, it looks like it reset to your original crop, Trish. Actually, I actually like the original crop. There's this one sort of thing down the bottom here that looks like a tooth that I might get rid of. Let's get rid of the tooth. There we go. See, and I could do auto white balance and auto tone. So there's the auto everything versus what I did. Okay. So you can certainly try auto. It's lifted the shadows a whole bunch. So let's see what happens if I do that. Okay. So if I lift the shadows, it's actually decreasing that contrast again. Okay. So it's not bad, but it gives you more drama when you have the deeper shadows, right? So if anything, I might lower this a little bit because I think we've gotten some clipping now. I'm going to lower the exposure a little bit, maybe on the highlights. But overall, I don't think I would lift the shadows because when you eliminate shadows, you eliminate all the texture, right? Watch what happens if I lower the highlights and lift the shadows, right? Can you see that? There's not as much texture as that. Okay, so texture, you need to have highlight and shadow and to pick up texture and form and shape. Okay, so look at how much more textured and rough that feels than this one. Okay. But it was definitely a good effort. Okay. Kelly, exactly. It's a good starting point. It gives you an idea. So if you're not sure what to do, you can start with that and then see where it goes. So this one looks closer to how you edit it. You like the contrasting white and blue with the local adjustment. Cool. You would be surprised how many professionals teaching sites that do that hit auto and thanks Sheila. Darlene does a great job of explaining why she's doing what she's doing. Exactly. I want to know how you type the heart. That's really cool. Okay, so that's our glacier. Now let's just see what happens if I take this and copy the settings. I'm going to copy the masking, and the only thing I'm not going to copy is the crop. And then let's see applying on the other one. Right. So obviously we need some adjustments here. We're gonna reset the crop. There's something black over on this side. Looks like maybe the edge of the window. So we're gonna crop that out. Right. And this one looks really dark. So I'm gonna brighten it up a little bit. Right. But look at this. Right. It looks like you cropped out the sky in your original one. I'm going to go and play with this mask a little bit here. So we're going to go maybe somewhere here. Oh, I've got an idea with this one, Trish. Okay, so we're going to move these up here. So I'm just readjusting my custom vignettes that I did. So I like the fact that you had trimmed the bottom off. We're going to go a little bit more. Okay. So now it feels like we're going up that hill, but I almost want a little bit more up here. Like you've got some really cool color. We've got a little bit clipping now, so we'll just fix that. Okay, so see how I did that? I saw the clipping warning up here. Okay, so I see that there was something going on up here. So all I did was I hit my Alt Option key, white slider, brought it down until there's no more clipping. Okay. Then I'm going to brighten the whole thing overall. So let's look at the difference, right? So again, it was very flat, but I like seeing the top part. Like I almost want to see more of the sky up here. Let me move this guy out of the road. Okay, so I almost want to lead us up here like that. That's kind of cool. Okay, see that? So now I'm leading you up the hill and I can see where my edits are sort of, you can see the circle of it. So I need to make sure I adjust my edits a little bit because my outer mask here is too strong. So I'm going to dial it back a little bit. So I was seeing my edits, right? So the fact that I was seeing my edits told me I need to dial it back a little bit. Okay. Then I can just go down here and do the overall vignette a little bit darker. And for me, that's really cool. Okay, the patterns in here are what is interesting. And I might even want to keep all this stuff down here. Yeah, for me, it's you come in here and you want to go up there. See what this happened? I hovered my mouse over by accident over one of my presets. And now look, right? What happens if we do a light preset? What happens if we go the other way, right? Let's go crazy. So you could do something completely different. Okay? But let's look at the before again. Okay, so again, flat versus punch. And I'm just going to reset this because I want to show you the original. Okay, so again, see the histogram? When you have a gap like this, that is telling you underexposed. Okay, so when you see this when you're shooting, and again, if you we're using the same settings, it's that +1 exposure. Okay, so that's your exposure in camera. That's what you're looking for here. Okay, especially when you're shooting a white subject like this. So when you're shooting a white subject and you see it all bunched in the middle and a gap, you're underexposed. Okay. There's lots of detail there to pull out, so not to worry, but just something to be aware of. You'll see a lot of instructors talk about shooting to the right, exposing to the right. And that's what they mean, is exposed so that your graph goes more to the right without going off the end. Okay. So I think let's leave it there. We can actually go more blue on this one. Ooh, that's nice. So now I'm shifting the white balance a little more blue, and that looks really cool. Okay. I might add another vignette using a linear gradient and do just a custom one on the edge here. Okay, so I want to just darken the edge ever so slightly so that, again, your eye comes in. But look at how big I'm making the spread. Okay, so I'm making it so that this edge thing here fades very gradually. Okay, so if I make it really dark, see how faded it is? Okay? The closer together you have these lines, the sharper your edit. Okay, so farther apart, the more gradual it's going to just sort of creep into the edge of the image, right? And that brings us up the hill to that brighter area. Okay. Cool images, Trish. Literally, literally, it feels cold. And from somebody from Canada, I'm not a fan of cold myself. So let's see. Tell us what you learned today. Let's see what we edited. Let's just review here. We did some glaciers. We did some tulips. And we did a seashell. I've got your rocks still, Trish. I may work on those another day. But that's what we worked on today. So ironically, 2 tulips, okay, and 2 snow. Okay, so what did you learn about Lightroom today, or about editing in general, or about Photoshop that you didn't know before you watched this class? Put it in the chat if you're watching this live, and if you're watching the replay of this video later, put a comment below the video and let me know if you picked up some tips from today's live. Right? Once again, I just want to hop over here to remind you that our Lightroom class is coming soon. If you could please share a link for that, Rob, and you can sign up for that now. I will have dates for it soon. And also, this is the link to submit images for the lives, and a reminder that we're going to be changing the date. Okay, so your link to submit, if you could please put that in the chat, please, as well, Rob. So Lightroom class and the link to submit. And a reminder that our next one of these will be May 18th 8 p.m. Eastern time. So I'm not sure, that might be early morning for you, Trish. There's a handy time zone converter that I often use to convert the time. So I'm just going to drop that into the chat here. I'm going to put it on the date that we're doing this. And then all you have to do is add your own time, and it will tell you what time it is for you. All right, so this is the time that it's going to happen. And I'm dropping that in the chat. Okay. So, for example, if I add Auckland, I'm not sure where you are in New Zealand, Trish. It's noon on Thursday, so you don't have to get up quite as early, Trish. So we'll see you at lunchtime next time. All right, let's see what everybody's learning. Using more than one mask on an image, absolutely. Okay, and multiple pieces of the masking things, even on one mask. Like I'll use a combination of them. Okay. Good reminder about the color picker. Excellent, Stephanie. Marguerite says, paying attention to the rules on when to use smart objects. I need to check my preferences. Use PSD instead of TIFF. Excellent. Power of masking is new to you. Awesome. Okay. You're using Lightroom, Ruth? Okay. Well, getting Renee Robin. She does layers and masking. And for those of you that aren't familiar with my friend Renee, I will share a link to her website because she does these amazing, actually I can bring it up on the screen here. She does these amazing composite images. So unlike anything, oops, I have to get out of this mode here. There we go. I'm going to get out of that. So this is her website here. And she does a lot of composites. She actually just did a video where she talked about doing these images with the horses. And she does amazing tutorials on, she's got a creative live class. If you want advanced Photoshop, this is the girl to watch, right? So some of her work is very, let's just call it sci-fi-ish, right? So she does things where she's combining different backgrounds from somewhere else. She might combine 15 or 20 images. For example, this guy here was shot in the studio. The snow wasn't there. She added the snow. She added fog and all those kinds of things. Okay, so that's her specialty. And if you're not familiar with her work, I think you'd really enjoy it. And not necessarily something that I do again, but I definitely appreciate the artistry involved in what she does, right? So that's a composite as well. She probably shot the man in the studio, and I'm sure he's not holding an actual flaming torch. So if you watch some of her tutorials, she's amazing. All right, let's see. Lightroom Classic, just got it. Okay, so there's lots of if you want to share the link to our Learn Lightroom section on our website as well for Ruth Rob, we have a bunch of other Lightroom tutorials. And also, let me just go back in here. Also, again, the Lightroom class coming up. So if you're new to Lightroom, Ruth, that class is for you. And there's a link in the chat somewhere as to where you can sign up for the Lightroom class. If you're not sure, just go to our website and hit the store and do it that way. I do have a survey that I want to send to everybody as well. And I know that some of you have already done it, but I want to ask you all about our website. Okay, so you're here on our YouTube channel, but we'd like to know a little bit more about, have you visited our website and what we can do on the website to make it better. So if you haven't already, please fill out this form and help us to improve our website. What is it that we can do? If you fill this out, we'll be sending out a $20 coupon to everybody that fills out all the questions on this one. So we'd love to have your feedback on how to make our website better. And are you aware of all the things that we have? Right? Obviously, you know we have YouTube because you're here. But did you know we have a Facebook group? And did you know that I do webinars and classes and things? Right? So check that out. Take care, Anne. Good to see you. All right. And good to see everybody. Yes, Kelly, you would know because you're in Edmonton too, right, Kelly? So you would know Renee's name. And I'm trying to have coffee with Renee forever. So I'm going to sign out. We've gone really long today, but I think we had some really cool images. And I hope you've enjoyed what we did and had some fun and definitely picked up a few tips today with Lightroom. We'll be back on the 18th with Luminar Neo. Take care.